Good morning. This is Fair Media Council CEO and Executive Director Jackie Clement. Welcome to day one of the news conference, where we focus on taking you inside the news ecosystem. We start local because every story, no matter how big, is a local story somewhere. Then we jump to the global stage and go behind the headlines of the coronavirus pandemic, the one story that changed everything for all of us. Take a lunch break and log back on to close out day one with a one-on-one chat with presidential scholar Douglas Brinkley. As always, your questions help drive the conversations. Many thanks to the talented speakers and moderators who are joining us from around the country. And we thank our sponsors for making this event possible, including Northwell Health, Protiviti, Mount Sinai South Nassau, St. Joseph's College, Henry Schein, Hofstra University, the Bartow Law Firm, WSHU Public Radio, and Long Island Business News. Now let's get to it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Star Fuentes, and I'm an aspiring multimedia journalist studying broadcast journalism at Five Towns College. I'm one of the Fair Media Council student ambassadors, and I'm here to introduce our first discussion. Let's get started. Our first panel is Local News and National Impact, featuring WABC TV's NJ Burkett and the Des Moines Register's Brianne Fanninsteel, former KTOK reporter Carrie Husley Green, Protiviti's Christopher Wright. Good morning, Christopher.
Good morning. Thank you, Star, for being here with us today and for introducing the panel. I look forward to a great discussion. We've got a panel of experienced and respected journalists with a lot to share on a topic that is important for all of us as we work in our local communities, but understand how that fits into the puzzle, that those pieces fit into the puzzle of national and global news. It's not, I'm not in the journalism business. I should just add that as a personal note before we kick off with the panel, my interest in the topic was when I was a high school senior. Local school board activity where I lived resulted in national news and in a U.S. Supreme Court case on and thankfully against book banning that had me on the nightly news and from my front lawn at 6:30 and then heading back into the house for dinner. So I've been aware of it and I won't tell you how long ago that was, but it's more than 3 and less than 4 decades ago. So I'm familiar with how quickly local news, well reported or not well reported, can result in some pretty important coverage for issues that are of interest outside our zip code. And so with that, I'd like to start with the first question for the panelists. And again, you can take this where you care to. I'm here to sort of keep the conversation going, not to dominate it or suggest answers or topics. But each of you has covered something that started out as a local story and became national or in some cases global news. And I'd be curious, and maybe we'll start with let's go alphabetical this time. We'll start with Brianne. As your story became obviously something more than a local story, what was your experience in not only reporting on that, but then dealing with the folks perhaps from national or the global networks who came in, if they did, and if how did that work? How did that interaction work? Were you able to did you have to bring them up to speed? Were you able to continue being the reporter? Was there any tension in that or any bringing people up to speed in either direction that had to occur?
So I'm a little bit of background before I dive in. I'm the chief politics reporter for the Des Moines Register. So we cover the Iowa caucuses, which kick off the presidential nominating process every 4 years, at least for now. And so what that means is that for 2 years leading up to the start of the caucuses, this past year it was February 3rd, 2020. For about 2 years leading up to that, we have every single person in the entire country who wants to be president traveling to Iowa and kind of meeting with Iowans, staking their claim here. And so this is, in my mind, a very quintessential local story. You know, the caucuses by design are supposed to be community meetings, right? They happen in living rooms, they happen in church basements. It's people negotiating politics with each other, talking to their neighbors. but it's become this national and international news story that has just grown bigger and bigger every single cycle. And so as local reporters on the story, we have to deal specifically with, who is my audience, who is reading the Des Moines Register, and what news do they need from me? Because eventually, the closer we get to the caucuses, the national news media comes in and they pick up the story, or they read our local coverage on the ground and they write some sweeping, beautiful, lovely piece that ties up all of the ribbons from kind of the day-to-day turn of the screw news that we've been doing. And so often they do a very great job. I think really highly of the national political reporters who come to Iowa and report on the caucuses. But it's really something to have been covering, the very day-to-day, little pieces of news, kind of advancing the story. And then, 2 weeks later, after you've been doing this, or months even, to see someone come in and kind of do the summary, based on the reporting that we've done. So it's very clear that people are reading what we're doing, and that what we write in the local press matters, because it gets picked up on, it gets linked to, it gets amplified in the national press. And so it's really kind of a love-hate relationship sometimes, because you want that news amplified. You want, the bigger audiences to pick up on what you've been doing. But at the same time, this is kind of your baby, right? This is your child that you've been covering very closely. And then to see it get taken outside of your control is really kind of a fascinating thing, because you can see the ways that other people are viewing your story. And sometimes they see it really differently than you do. And that can be a good thing and a bad thing, but it's really a fascinating dynamic as a reporter to see your local story become national news.
And have you felt the need to, let me say there's a difference between a different twist and somebody completely butchering the topic. Have you ever felt the need to come on the air and say, well, that really wasn't a diner, it was a restaurant, that wasn't the right town? Do clarifications and follow-ups? Or
Absolutely. And, sometimes there are little things, right? As a local reporter, you have, the instinct to want to be a little bit territorial and correct people on little things. A lot of this is a very common one. It's small and it's tiny, but it happens all the time. So we laugh about it. Des Moines, the capital city, is not in Des Moines County. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that misprinted in national stories. We're in Polk County. And so it's little things like that, right? That make you as a local reporter say, well, they didn't pay very much attention. But, we try to be helpful more than anything. I think the local and the national press have a really good relationship. But I think more often what drives local readers, local reporters crazy is when people come into the state without really a good understanding, and they paint with really broad brushes about rural America and what life in Iowa is like. It's all hay bales and soybeans. And, we often feel like nuance gets lost and we get painted with a broad brush that isn't true to reality.
Got it. Great. Thank you. And I know, Carrie, you had one of your earlier experiences some time ago was with something that I think had us all glued to our televisions in Oklahoma City. Perhaps your views on the topic.
Well, I will say I had been a cop and court reporter for about 5 years. So I was already kind of embedded into fire and police and the court system in Oklahoma City, and had really good relationships with those who were our media representatives for those entities. But what was strange, and I know it's bizarre to look back, right, and think I didn't realize other people were watching until I turned around, and the parking lot that we had decided to set up in had about 50 satellite trucks. And about 3 a.m., there were people arriving in limousines and from, CNN and NBC, and Tom Brokaw stepping out of the car 2 days later. And, these are people that we had been watching. And then we had the FBI coming in, trying to control a lot of the press conferences, and who finally retired as the chief of police, Bill City in Oklahoma City. He was the PIO at the time, and he kind of stepped in the middle of it and said, look, we have local people who have been covering this since 9:02 a.m. and 30 seconds. You need to back off and let me handle the media and make sure we are being respectful to the people who were here. And so that kind of laid a really great groundwork for moving forward. We were kind of put in the front for pool reporting. They were very respectful for that, with us for that. I think there's a sense sometimes from a local reporter that the national people come in and nothing you say matters anymore, right? I mean, that's kind of the way it makes you feel for a second. And when you're dealing with something like an Oklahoma City bombing that has a lot of death tied to it and grieving and shock. I mean, the whole city was shocked. The whole state, right? Probably the whole nation. I mean, when you're talking about somebody from within doing something so powerful and meaningful, it kind of rocks you to your core. It's one thing when we all band together as Americans and we think about the outside coming in to hurt us. But when it's somebody within, it's first of all, it's really difficult for people to grasp that from the beginning of it. And the second is you're constantly wondering what's next. Is there something else coming? And so because of the relationships that we had built as local reporters, and because of how personal this whole event was to those who were living in Oklahoma City, we just had people that stepped up in front, local leaders that said, this is how this is going to work. We're going to give everybody the same chance, but we're going to make sure that we respect those who are here and living through it first. And then, of course, it just got so big from an investigative standpoint. Once the focus wasn't on the building and the recovery efforts, I mean, you know, it moves on to a different level of reporting from that standpoint. But then, because of the time that we were living in, 1995, reporters were asked to be kind of witnesses for national news in the beginning. So I don't know if no one may remember Tom Snyder, but he was still doing the Late Late Show, and I was on the Late Late Show that night. And then Rush Limbaugh, we happened to be a flag station, KTOK was or is, I think, still for Rush Limbaugh. So he was pulling our reporters into his interviews. So when it's something like that, you become both a witness for national media and you're still reporting.
I'm old enough to remember Tom Snyder and Dan Aykroyd as Tom Snyder.
Yeah.
Both, right? It was obviously I guess the challenge you probably had as well was the fact that on day zero and day one, it wasn't abundantly clear how big or how wide it was going to be. You know, the domestic terrorist wasn't from around there, but you didn't know that. Nobody knew, right? So
that's right.
Was there a sort of we don't know anything today, but as the days went on, did the mix shift? Was it, less local and more national over time because as it became a national story, or were you on the scene every day?
I happened to be on the backside of the building actually when the explosion occurred. Wow. So because that was my routine every morning, to go downtown, to look at the federal docket, to look at the, and just make sure what was going on. So I actually was stuck in traffic at 8:55 in front of the Murrah building. So when I went back around and was pulling out, that's when it exploded. And initially, I thought it was a church, a St. John's church that was built in like 18 something. I thought that's what had happened because all the glass came pouring out on my car. And, in my cop and court reporter mind, I'm thinking, man, I've got this great vantage point. I'm going to do this until noon. And then this story about the gas leak in the church is going to be over. And then I looked back, in my rearview mirror and I saw all the smoke coming up. And even then, you're not thinking, oh, it's domestic terrorism. Oh, look at the date. It's Waco. It's Ruby Ridge. It's, you're just not thinking that. And I don't think it ever, for me, wasn't a local story because I'm dealing with 168 family members who have lost someone. And, not just the investigation of who did it and why, but now we have to deal with the hourly identity of people. We've made these identifications, and you're getting into I don't think it ever doesn't become local for you.
Great. Thank you. And although Iowa can often be the media capital of the world, at least every 4 years, probably this time of year, actually, NJ operates in what is arguably almost all the rest of the time the media capital of the world. And perhaps, NJ, from your perspective, looks like you're on the scene somewhere.
I am
Are you
actually.
Are you breaking a story?
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
We're actually getting in position to do something for our 12 noon broadcast at WABC on the governor's position with respect to coronavirus restrictions in the state of New York and in New York City in particular. While the state of New York has been open for indoor dining literally for months now, indoor dining in New York City was cut back in, I guess it was like a third week in November. They were running at 25% of indoor capacity. And then the governor said, nope, we're closing indoor dining because he was anticipating the holiday surge. And we have now essentially in New York been stuck with outdoor dining since then. And outdoor dining in New York City in the dead of winter is not pleasant. I mean, you know, by the time they come out with your hot food, even if you're dressed and you're warm and you're bundled up, by the time they come out with your hot food, within 5 minutes it's cold. So it's not been a good situation for restaurants in New York City, no question about it. So my photographer, Steve Jacobowitz, and I are actually out here on Park Avenue South, where we're going to be fronting the piece for our 12 noon broadcast.
Great.
But I told Jackie that you know, wherever I am and whatever I'm doing, I will call into the panel. So I'm really happy to be here.
Well, so NJ, you know, we were focused initially on, you know, the reporting you wound up doing on 9/11 and other things. Any views? Again, you've got a particular vantage point because while it's local news, you're in a capital where the national folks are probably nearby or next door.
Sure.
How does that dynamic work? Doing arguably local news in a fairly large market.
You know, I'm alongside the national folks quite often,
right?
And even the international folks from time to time too. You know, there will be stories that happen in New York, 9/11, chief among them, that attract you know, the global media corps. And you know, it's interesting to hear Carrie talk about the Oklahoma City bombing. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you guys will correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think that's where the phrase domestic terrorist actually was coined and actually took hold. You know, 9/11, I mean, it's a very difficult thing to talk about for me because of the situation that I was in. You know, Carrie was there when Oklahoma City happened. I was covering 2 plane crashes when the World Trade Center collapsed. You know, I was not covering the collapse of the tallest buildings in the Northern Hemisphere or in North America anyway. I was covering plane crashes. So yeah, it was a shocking thing. We didn't expect the buildings to come down. I don't think the fire department expected the buildings to come down, or they wouldn't have set up their command post across the street from the burning buildings. So you know, some of us were very fortunate to have gotten out of that. What I would say struck me about 9/11 and the coverage, because that's sort of what you're talking about, is, you know, when the national press corps shows up on a local story, you know, your sort of local story, but it becomes a national, international story. So the local people now work side by side with the national people. And then in the case of 9/11, the international media corps. And what was interesting about 9/11 with respect to that was how they came in and made a hero out of Giuliani. That's the thing that blew away a lot of the local reporters who had been covering basically the implosion of Giuliani's political career. And then to see how the international media came in. And look, you guys are in journalism, you guys are in media, and those of you who are watching this panel in media understand what happens sometimes. Because when awful things happen, I think that some members of the media, see villains clearly. Okay, the hijackers are the villains, but they look for heroes and villains. There's always this like narrative that people need to come up with to make the story more saleable. Because facts alone, a lot of the time, are not enough in some cases for some people. So the World Media Press Corps kind of came in and said, okay, well, look, we know who the villains are. Now we need a hero. And then, of course, Giuliani just sort of, serves himself up as the hero. The only time, this is interesting, the only time you could make pictures of the ruins of the World Trade Center is if Giuliani was taking you on a walking tour and you had him walking through it with you. The access was tightly restricted. But that's the point that when Carrie was talking about the situation, that's the thing that occurred to me. It's like, wow, that time that they turned Giuliani into this Churchillian figure, that to those of us in the New York Media Corps was sort of like, really?
Yeah, people do forget that 9/11/01 was the second Tuesday in September and was primary day. Actually, his successor was being chosen. We all then voted 2 weeks later, right? I live in Nassau County on Long Island. We had a primary as well. So you're right. It was the political environment that morning wouldn't have suggested what happened later that day, right?
And Giuliani, in fact, used 9/11 as a pretext to try to extend his term. To essentially, say, what, I realize, we had an election and everything. I need to continue running the city of New York. So,
It's almost like we've heard that recently. So NJ, I guess, while I have you on, you mentioned the COVID and restaurant scenario. I live in New York, so it may be hard for me to tell, and Carrie and Brianne could perhaps correct this view, but it seemed to me that early on in the pandemic, New York was sort of the epicenter of reporting on COVID cases. The daily gubernatorial conference and stuff like that. Did that become a similar scenario where you found yourself alongside national and global folks as that reporting occurred?
Well, it's interesting that you should pose that question because it's a pandemic, so we're not really alongside one another. We're we're working all sort of remotely,
suitably distant.
Exactly.
Right.
So whereas I would ordinarily be perhaps working alongside my colleagues at ABC News, who, I know it's my network, but I think they've done an extraordinary job and a very even-handed and sensible job in reporting the facts of COVID-19 and not allowing certain constituencies to color their coverage. Sorry, I had to make the point about ABC in particular because I thought I think they've done a great job. We've also been very, very careful about the coverage of COVID-19 here in New York. In fact, we just had this morning, we had a presentation by a consultant who works with us, talking to us specifically about the statistics and how many people are relying on local news for their coverage, in particular because it reflects what's happening within their communities. I think what's happening, and this is a really interesting phenomenon, and I've been in this business a while and I haven't really seen this, but because of the pandemic, you have people in New York, I can speak to New York, I can't speak to some of these other markets, but in New York, you have a situation where people who didn't feel like they had to watch local news. It's, no, I watch NewsHour. That's all I do is watch NewsHour. Or I listen to NPR on the radio, and that's as much news as I need. That's the kind of news that I need. Local news, car crashes, police misconduct cases or whatever, fires, in Brooklyn or whatever, they're not relevant to me. Well, all of a sudden, the pandemic made local news relevant to people who didn't really see it as relevant to them before. As a result, our ratings have gone up correspondingly. And I mean, to a large degree. And that's really exciting. That's really impressive. And I think that even when the pandemic subsides, because we've been working so hard on this and focusing our resources on telling people what they need to know when they need to know it, and constantly doing updates on statistics, I think we're going to convert a lot of these people. So I don't know, I'm watching NewsHour and that's it. So I'm excited about that, but it's an interesting sort of felicitous byproduct of giving people the news. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. So Brianne, you touched on this with the Iowa caucuses being a focal point of local and national and sometimes global news. I'm going to ask all three of you to talk about what's changed, but in your case, Brianne, I also may ask you to predict what might change, especially when you have a dynamic as a history was my other major. In addition to accounting, I think we have for the first time in a long time, if not since anyone's been tracking it, the president of the United States didn't win New Hampshire or Iowa, right? And is that going to change the locus, or was that a fluke and it'll be back to normal? Curious if what you view, and you don't have to focus just on the caucuses, but what has changed about local news and reporting it, and how that works with national in your time doing it over a number of cycles, and what do you think may be coming in terms of future change?
Well, to your question about the caucuses, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen right now. I don't know how many viewers were tuned into this past February, where the Democrats really failed to deliver timely and accurate results. It was a giant mess, basically, for the state party. And so I think that's going to change a lot of what happens with the caucuses going forward. The president specifically, Iowa doesn't have a strong history of picking presidents as winners of the caucuses, but really kind of narrowing the field for the future. And so I think Iowa will, the Republicans right now are looking to 2024 already. There are already starting to be rumblings of how that's going to be happening. But one thing that's changed, I think, in the coverage of the caucuses is just how early people tune in. And then, adding in social media and the use of Twitter has been really dramatic, even since the 2015 cycle, and the president really, using that as his medium of choice, and the ways that these candidates interact with people, circumventing the press sometimes. And so one thing that's really interesting in the story of the caucuses is the way the candidates use the local versus the national media, and when they come in, how they target their message specifically to local press. Pete Buttigieg this year was someone who was really aggressive in sitting down with every teeny tiny small town newspaper in every city that he went to, and he ended up on the front page of every single local newspaper. I think what's really interesting is that even as media is progressing, candidates who are trying to compete in rural Iowa and in places outside of major media markets are really rediscovering the power of super local press. Like the Register is the largest media organization in the state, but if you go out to these smaller towns, Cindy Axne is our U.S. representative, one of them, and she is one of the few Democrats who's been successful in Iowa this past cycle, and she credits that to talking with radio, to sitting down with all of the local radio stations. So it's interesting that even as things change, they stay the same, and the need for these candidates to go back to really targeted messages to really targeted audiences.
And so you think from a campaign dynamic perspective, some of the direct to consumer marketing, if you will, may change in people, because they look at who won the last time. You think there may be a shift because Buttigieg arguably at least came out slightly on top in the Iowa caucuses, so that worked for him. Others may follow suit because of the success breeds imitation. Is that a fair expectation?
Yeah, it's really interesting the way the candidates prioritize this, though, because you do see some come in. I think the way the media has shifted is just the nationalization of this story more broadly. I would say that Buttigieg was actually the exception. A lot of these candidates come in and do national, sit downs with MSNBC anchors from Des Moines so that they can have that dateline, right? on the screen when they're doing the interview, rather than sitting down with Des Moines media. And so there's just the nationalization of a story, and kind of almost pulling it away from what it was intended to be as a local story. And so there's a constant tension as a local reporter to say, look, this is my community. These are the people who I know, who I'm reporting on. I think Carrie made the really good point that as a local reporter, it's very different to be reporting on your own community and to something that is meaningful to you personally, because they're your neighbors, they're people you interact with. It's part of your way of life. And so, I think we're constantly fighting to protect that and to fight against the nationalization of the story, and to remind our readers that, we understand this process better than anyone, and we're going to be here even after the national press moves on.
And if you think about a caucus, the nature of how that works, that's neighbors standing in circles and raising their hands, right? It's also person to person, and it may be more valuable for a candidate to get local press, because that's what the activists are reading, or the more likely to vote, right? So that you shifting sands on that, right? And availability of Twitter nowadays isn't exactly a guarantee for every candidate either, right? So
right.
there could be restrictions on that as well. Great.
And I was going to say, also, being on the other side, doing reputation management and public information for two major universities, while it's important for us to get national recognition for things, local coverage is where decisions are made, right? I mean, how the Oklahoman responds to whatever the event is here at Oklahoma State University, or how the Lincoln Journal-Star, their opinion on what we're doing at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln has a lot more impact on a chancellor's decision based on what that regent has read in that local paper, what kind of coverage they're getting, what kind of pushback they're getting from a local standpoint. I mean, if you have an event that is big enough to get the USA Today in here to do a story, it's going to matter. But on a rotating basis, it's that local coverage that really moves and shifts people in their decision making, those leadership roles, and those relationships with those big newspapers or radio entities or broadcast entities, and from a local standpoint, are really the ones that are at the table every day and who are considered whenever we're making big decisions that impact 37,000 students and employees, especially when you're dealing with flagship universities that have major economic impact from a statewide, a land grant university in a rural state, right? I mean, that's a big impact. I'm sure Brianna knows that, living in Iowa. I mean, there's a lot of political power that goes along with those huge universities. So while it's important, and we always want those USA Today headlines or great shots about a research or even an athletic win, that daily press working with those reporters every day is really what gets you, I think, outcomes from coverage that can be that can help our leadership make different decisions.
So, for example, in a public information office for a university, it's the local press that's going to put people in the room for a fundraiser when we can do that again, or get the zoning board to agree to whatever you need to do from a property, or even curb cuts and roads, right? That sort of thing. It drives
that kind of situation, and also retention and admission. I mean, if we have a lot of stories that are dealing with sexual assault on our campus, that makes a big impact on parents who are going to fork over, $10,000 a semester or whatever it is, whatever your school. No matter how adult our college students are, they are still someone's baby, and parents want to know that they're sending their kids somewhere that's safe. So everything matters. Racial events on campus, sexual assault, athletics, it all rolls in to one big product is what we're talking about where people want to spend their money to send their children to get their education. And And these days it all matters because it spreads so quickly and so fast. You can't get out in front of the story, especially if you have 18 to 25-year-olds driving the story on social media and on platforms that I don't even know how to operate anymore, right?
You raise a good point. In terms of what changed in local news coverage certainly since the Oklahoma City bombing. In 1995, I had an email address. I didn't, Facebook, I don't know if it existed or not. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, not for me, didn't have it, right? So I would rely on a terrestrial news station, because I'm not sure I was even necessarily plugged into 24-hour cable. How has that dynamic shifted what you do or have to prepare others to do to achieve those very important local results?
Well, we have to consider meeting people where they're living. And for us, we have an entire population that is living on Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter. They're not picking up the newspaper, and they're only looking at stories that are fed to them in those platforms. So again, you get into that whole idea that you're only seeing what you're interested in, right? Those algorithms that Facebook and Twitter push. I mean, I'm even amazed when I'm scrolling through the things that come up. I'm like, how did they know I looked at that last night? I mean, it's amazing, right? So for instance, we have a snow day today in Nebraska, and we used to push those out, make sure that they got pushed out first through our emergency alert system. Now we make sure it goes out in Twitter and in those worlds first, because we know that's where our students are going to see it first. I mean, I can't even get my daughter to read my texts at the University of Arkansas, but if I Snapchat her, she is on it, right? And it's the same device. So I think we all get lazy and used to the type of news that we're getting fed, and everyone, I think the last 4 years has taught us, you have to dig in, and digging in locally is where you really figure out how these national stories and big events are going to impact you. I think, to NJ's point, this pandemic, it's almost like a tornado here because I live in Oklahoma still. Local news is how you get your information about a tornado, right? It's the same with a pandemic. Where do I go to get the vaccine? I'm not going to go to CNN about that. I'm going to go to a news station or a local entity for that kind of information. And I think he's right. This pandemic has taught us that we need to be very laser focused on how we're receiving our information, and then where we're going to continue to receive our information. And I have to say, I think the majority of consumers do understand that the CNNs, the Fox, those 24-hour type of, I think they see them though as an entertainment source as well. It's not just the facts. I think people who want just the facts tend to look locally for those.
Thank you. So NJ, any observations on what's changed and really what you expect to see change as the local news landscape evolves?
Well, I just have to go back to something that Carrie said a moment ago. She made reference to a $10,000 a semester tuition. I'd like to know where that is.
Yeah, please send us the list.
I'm paying, just so you know, I'm paying $30,000 a semester for my daughter at NYU. So
yeah,
that's
University of Arkansas, Nebraska, and Oklahoma State University. Yeah, those are in-state. That's in-state though. Yeah,
in-state. Okay,
yeah.
I was just being a little facetious, but
I understand. I'm putting one through right now.
share links in the comments. We'll take them.
I will.
What I would add to what everybody has said about local news, and in particular what Carrie said, is not just that people are tuning in to local news in greater numbers because they perceive that it's more relevant to them, and it is. It's also a trust factor. I believe it was Poynter or Pew, one of the polling services, said that local news is the #1 source that people trust the most for information. When it comes to getting the news, they trust their local news more than anybody. And you might say, well, why would they trust Bill Ritter as our anchorman, for example? Why would they trust Bill Ritter more than David Muir? Well, I mean, they're both excellent journalists, right? Well, because maybe they see Bill Ritter at Fairway, maybe they see Sade on the subway, maybe they see me at the local pizzeria or wherever I would be, right? Subway, of course. But it's because the local news anchors and reporters live in the communities that they're reporting on. And I think that because of that, there is a higher trust factor with local news. And also, a local news does not become a target, for extremes on the right or the left. Extreme right-wing people will attack CNN. Extreme left-wing people will attack, Newsmax and OAN and Fox. So we're sort of, watching the rhetorical missiles flying over our heads in local news. So I think that also helps. That no one's really, going in there and trying to discredit us, and I think that's also a factor.
The affiliates aren't necessarily drawing the extreme ire that the nationals might, even though there's an A, a C, or an N in the first digit of your first place of your name. It's you're less likely to be considered national fake news by whoever has an extreme view of from either position.
Well, listen, I mean, we'll still drive down the street somewhere, on a given day, and have somebody see the truck, which is clearly marked as Eyewitness News, ABC, fake news, that happens. But I think it happens more with members of the national media corps because they are more of a target.
Gotcha. So it's more news and weather is probably what draws them to the station. You get credibility for getting that right, as correct as either can be.
I'll take credit for Lee Goldberg and Sam and Amy and Jeff. Sure.
I would not check CNN or Fox for traffic and weather. I would check Channel 61, News 12, traffic and weather. Right.
All right. We're Long Island.
In my area, right? So same concept, right? So great. We have some questions coming in the Q&A, and I thought some of them might really set up a conversation for all the panelists. The question is for Brianna, but it really is a case of a question about whether the something local that became national, was local. What was the local reporting on it beforehand? And in this particular case, it was back to the Iowa caucuses. The change in the rules for reporting the results in the most recent election that may have caught national viewers by surprise, but was, one, was there local reporting on that, 6 months earlier when it was a local news story? And did people talk about it locally? Were they all, was there somebody who you were able to put on TV who said, I knew this wouldn't work, that's what I told you, that sort of thing? Was there a local nuance to that, what became a national story, as you mentioned, because we didn't know for a while who won? And if so, what was the local reporting involvement in that?
I love that you asked that question because I did a lot of reporting on that locally for the Register, and for a long time felt like I was kind of running around with my hair on fire, like, the sky is falling and nobody else really paying much attention, that this could be a real problem. That I was very concerned early on that we were going to have these 3 new metrics for reporting results, and we don't have to get too into the arcane rules of the Iowa caucuses, but there were going to be 3 metrics now to define a winner that we hadn't had before. And so I was deeply concerned as a local reporter that the Register was going to declare Bernie Sanders the winner based on one metric. CNN was going to say Pete Buttigieg won based on another. And, MSNBC was going to declare it for Elizabeth Warren. Like, there was a real chance that a different person won each metric. And so for months, I felt like I was the only person reporting on this. And then finally, it did pick up much closer to caucus day, where some of the national papers did run stories on this. But I don't think it ever really seeped into the national consciousness that this could be a real issue, the way that they had changed all of these rules. So yeah, I think that's a very clear example where we were reporting on it locally. It was the subject of every conversation I had with a source for a really long time. And then on caucus night, a lot of people kind of had to catch up with that idea.
And when it did come down, did somebody find some old archived material and come looking for you? Did you wind up having to be sort of interviewed as the interviewee as opposed to the reporter?
By the time that it came to pass, I think everyone was actually running around with their hair on fire, trying to say what had actually gone wrong with this app behind the scenes and all of these other problems. But yeah, you do reach a point where people are calling on you as a local reporter to be the quote unquote expert on TV and to kind of give your insights. And so it's an extra layer of intensity for a breaking news situation like that, where you're trying to do your own reporting and then to go and be a voice for the paper and to say, nationally what's going on. But we try to make room for that because we do think being closer to the story and having that voice represented on NPR, on CNN, on wherever, that's really important for local news.
Great. And Carrie, any analogous situations that you can share? Where
Regarding, do you mean regarding, I'm sorry.
Where a local nuance may have been reported or ignored and it became important after the fact and suddenly,
There was, I can't remember specifics. We had some of that going on during the Oklahoma City bombing, where a national reporter would come out and say something, and then all of us were like, where did they get that information? That's not even true. I mean, so we would, run over to John Hanson or Bill City, who were, the respective for the fire department, and go, and they would be like, I don't know. I don't know where. So I think sometimes that's one of the issues when national people come in. They really don't know the sources that they need to be trusting, right? Because they haven't been dug in for so many years. And if you're talking to, if you're not going to the right source, then before you know it, you're feeding people information from a national standpoint that probably isn't correct. And I think there's a feeding frenzy too, when you have a story like an Oklahoma City bombing that is moving so quickly and everybody is just needing information. And by, unfortunately, the third or fourth day, when we're still in a recovery mode and investigation isn't going fast enough or whatever, that tends to breed people filling in the blanks themselves, especially from a national standpoint. Because they're not dug in. I think local people tend to be very careful about what they're putting out because they know the people it's going to impact. So I think that's just the difference when you are pushed into a local story from a national perspective. All you hear is your editor or your person, in your ear. We need something now. We need something now. And I think it's much easier for local people to stretch those stories out and be able to talk about the impact and not be so worried about the deadline, if that makes sense.
Great. Yeah, because you can follow up. You're not there just for a day. You're there every day.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
There's another question in the box, and I'll pivot over to NJ for this, and others can weigh in as well. It was really more of an observation that the reason the local news may be more relevant is that, and the direct quote is that, the person knows who the fire chief is as opposed to trying to understand the landscape. Let's put it in a COVID-19 context. I think, NJ, maybe it's who knows who the health commissioner is. And in that case, that might be who's the health commissioner in, Summit County, New Jersey versus Nassau County, New York too. Has that become a factor in terms of being able to be more relevant, is to know who the locals are and get them on the scene and on the site so that the news can be more helpful, if you will, or more relevant?
I'm not sure about that. I mean, in listening to Carrie recount her experiences with Oklahoma City, I'm struck by how little has changed in all of those years. We're still going about covering stories in the same basic way. And you were talking about, the years before Facebook and Twitter, and Snapchat and social media sites like that. Now I think that the main difference is that if you have a big story now, you don't sit on it until the 6 o'clock news.
Mhm.
and shock everybody, and now we begin with an exclusive report. You don't do that. If you have a detail, you have a story to break, it goes out on Twitter as soon as you have it confirmed.
Mhm.
And yes, you do run the risk of everybody, being able to dial up their sources and confirm your story and put it out there. But now the difference is that social media has moved up your deadline on getting things out and the imperative to get things out.
Film right here instead of film at 11.
Right? Film at
NJ,
11.
NJ, that reminds me, whenever the federal grand jury was impaneled for the Oklahoma City bombing, all of the national press had kind of moved out, and we were working, I would feed things to the LA Times just from a filing standpoint, because they wanted the documents, things like that. So it was me and a couple of Oklahoman investigating reporters outside the federal grand jury room. Nobody else, just us. And Timothy McVeigh's sister came out and she was crying. And these two print reporters, looked at me and said, "You are going to follow her into the bathroom, aren't you?" And I was like, I guess I'm the only one that can. But I remember talking with them and they would say, your radio, you can get on immediately. Can you just hold this for like another hour or whatever? Because we worked together, right? Because they knew I could go on at any moment and do exactly what NJ said. You tweet it out, you tweet out those details as they're coming to you. In 95, you didn't really think in those terms. It was always about beating the newspaper the next morning that was going to be in print, right? And so we began working together. And that's when I realized that I really had the most immediate way of reporting, because I didn't have to wait on a camera. I didn't have to wait on a producer back at the news station. I just simply found a phone, because nobody had cell phones then, and did the story. But there is also, I don't know how Brianna feels now, but I always felt a real camaraderie, and maybe it was because I was the only radio reporter around in those moments, with print and with television reporters. I always felt like whatever we were working on, we were kind of trying to find the truth or the story together. It wasn't ever competitive for me. Maybe that's just who I am, especially with the Oklahoma City bombing. I always felt like this is information that everybody wants here in the state. So it doesn't really matter who gets it first. That was my approach to the story.
Yeah, radio can break in, right? Although in where I live, and this may not be everybody else's experience, it's less and less local radio. And
there's not many
a lot
of
them
them
are national
anymore.
programming. So
yeah, don't have
Good.
the money to pay reporters.
Yeah, I know, and it's national programming, and someone's running a set list off of Pandora or something for the music.
Yeah.
Early, right? And they might break in. So that's great perspective. We have some. I think that's all for the questions that we had come in. We have a few minutes remaining, and I thought I would just open it up to each of you. Perhaps we'll go in reverse order. So we can hear from NJ, and then Carrie, and then Brianne in reverse alphabetical order. Just any parting thoughts on the best ways to work with local news, to not to make a national story happen, but really to help us with local reporting and better information.
As you know, Chris, because you're on the board, and Jackie knows this, I am always really grateful to be part of these panels. I've done a fair amount of them in my years at WABC. And one of the things that I try to impart to people, because I know that there is an imperative sort of in this situation to give people news they can use, as the expression goes. And for people who work in public relations and people who work in media strategy and that sort of thing, the number one thing that you can do that journalists and reporters really appreciate, and Carrie gets us being on both sides of it, is being honest and being straightforward. Because you can sell a reporter a bill of goods about something, and you can do that once. You're not going to be able to do it a second time. And it's not like I see a lot of that, fortunately, but I do think that the most important thing for people to understand who are on that other end of it is that a reporter can be a great friend to have, a great contact. But it's extremely important that you make it clear as to where you're coming from and what your objectives are. And as long as everybody's really clear on that, you can have a really good, satisfying relationship with a journalist. So if I leave people with anything, beyond what I've said already, and that is to try to give people a sense of what it is that can help you nurture a good relationship with a reporter, that's the number one thing that I see.
I would echo that too. I think it all comes down to relationships. The relationship I had with Bill City prior to the Oklahoma City bombing helped me in covering the Oklahoma City bombing. The relationships that I kept with reporters while I was working for Oklahoma State University helped me whenever we were trying to get information out or not wanting information to get out. And, I'm a little bit more removed because I work remotely, but the relationships that I'm building with reporters in Nebraska, even though it's over the phone, it matters. It matters when you reach out to them. It matters when you can't reach out to them. They tend to give you the benefit of the doubt when they know things are swirling around and you can't get right back to them. I would drill down. I mean, that's the biggest lesson I learned from being part of the Oklahoma City bombing, is that listening to people matters. Listening to what they have to say, listening to their grievances, whatever it is, listening matters, and building those relationships matters. It matters. Even though you can shut your door and shut reporters out from a PR standpoint, being able to pick up the phone and them know that they trust you and that you're not going to hide something from them or whatever it is, whatever they think you're doing, right? That's how you get through those, I would say, rough experiences with the press that you might have because of an event or whatever it is, fill in the blank. Relationships matter.
Great, thank you.
I think I would add, approaching those relationships with a sense of empathy, and understanding what the media landscape looks like right now, especially when you're working with local reporters. Newsrooms have been absolutely decimated. The number of when you ask about changes in the industry, the number of reporters in our newsroom that's changed even over the last 2 years, let alone 5 or 10, is outrageous. The amount of work that a local reporter is being asked to do today is tenfold compared to what we were doing before. And we are being asked to do things more immediately, to get it onto Twitter, to get it immediately onto the radio or onto TV, to get it into the next day's print on top of that, with earlier deadlines and fewer people to copy edit it. And then especially right now in this moment that we're in, I do personally feel, and maybe it's because we are covering more politics at the Register, that it has become far more toxic as far as readers and fake news and the attacks being lobbied at us. Every morning I wake up with hate mail in my inbox or on my cell phone. The things that reporters are doing today is so much more. And so to approach a story pitch or to develop those relationships, to understand a little bit of what newsrooms are facing, I think goes a really long way. And even right now, like, our whole newsroom has had to pivot to cover the pandemic, right? We're all healthcare reporters now, regardless of what we were doing before, because it's such a big news story. So I think just approaching those relationships as you're starting to form them, understanding that, today, I tell people I've had to say no so much more this year than I have in any other year that I have to pitches from PR and, communications representatives, because there's so much news on, last year, your story may have been the front page of the Sunday paper. Today, it's the 5th most interesting thing happening on my to-do list. And so, just understanding the state of things and having a little bit of empathy for the reporters you're working with.
Great, thank you. And thank you all. We are right at time. I started out by saying we had a great panel of experienced and respected journalists who had a lot to share. That turned out to be true. Thank you all. And we had great representation from print, radio, and television. I appreciate NJ and Brianne and Carrie's contributions and your answers to questions, but also your engaging panel discussion. And want to thank you for that on behalf of the Fair Media Council. So we're going to turn it over to, I believe, to the moderator for the next session.